Hello, Internet. My name is Sir Lord, and today let's talk originality. So, this is a term used to describe an original work or new IP or anything like that. But if you're familiar with the idea of philosophy and storytelling, there's arguments that everything has to be derivative. You have to have something in order to create. You have to have a basis or an inspiration, a muse, any of these things. And it's a topic I think about quite often, and I wanted to hear other people's thoughts on it. So, for today, we're going to use Pokemon kind of as an example. Most people are familiar with Pokemon in some form or fashion. And if not, we'll branch off into more topics, but starting off, let's begin with Pokemon, because it's a very good way to establish the concept and ideas that I'm going to be talking about today. So, specifically with Pokemon, let's use Charizard and Vanillish as an example, okay? So, when Generation 5 was coming out, Vanillish was revealed or found, or I don't remember the exact, I think it was revealed. It's an ice cream Pokemon for those who are unfamiliar, so it looks like an ice cream cone. And there was a huge debate about Gen 5 Pokemon designs being bad because they're unoriginal, and Vanillish was cited as one of the biggest offenders of that issue. Now, that happens in every Pokemon generation, not saying Gen 5 is special for it, but I remember that's the one I remember the most. The arguments I remember the most vividly. And it always stuck out to me as weird for some reason because they touted Charizard as one of the most original Pokemon. I mean, he's from the original generation, and he has a design that most people enjoy. Like, everyone knows Charizard. I don't need to explain what a Charizard is. You know about the holographic Charizard that's worth a gajillion dollars. Like, everyone knows who Charizard is. But to me, it's weird that he's touted as one of the most original, quote unquote, original Pokemon when he has a design that is used frequently in other media. So the idea behind him is a dragon, right? Bipedal dragon. You could argue flying lizard, but dragons are flying lizards as well. So I'm going to say flying lizard is an idea that's used constantly in all sorts of media. And I don't even mean post Pokemon, like post Red, Blue. I mean, dragons have been around for ages. The idea to me that Charizard, a dragon, that is somewhat unique. He's bipedal, which is not very often associated with dragons. So, like, fair. But he still breathes fire. He has the wings. He's more of an orangish color. Like, there's very clear inspirations of dragon in him. And he is not an original idea if you look at it in terms of having inspiration like the ice cream cone does. The ice cream cone, obviously inspired by ice cream. But if you tout Vanillish as a non original, Charizard must follow suit as well as not original, as it is clearly derived from something. And arguably, he is less original than Vanillish, not because he's a dragon, but because of how many different sources you have to pull from for a dragon. So you have dragons in pretty much all cultures. There's dragons in movies, video games, books, all predating Charizard. You have Smog in Lord of the Rings, for instance. In video games, you have Dragon Quest, quite literally in the name. There are dragons in that game, and they are bipedal and kind of have a beer belly, kind of like Charizard. Like, I wouldn't doubt that Dragon Quest was a very heavy influence for Charizard. But you have lots of examples of Pokemon being inspired by other ideas. So I don't think it's necessarily an argue of originality. It's more of practicality for these people, but they mistake it for originality. I'm not going to get into the practicality argument and deeper into that specific debate, but we'll stick with why I think vanillish in this context is more of a unique design. So, vanillish designed after ice cream. There are not very many games, movies, books, or media where the ice cream can attack and possibly try and kill you. Uh, and I think that the game itself has a very interesting take on vanillish, where vanillish inspires ice cream in that universe. So the idea of ice cream cones is derived from vanillish, which is kind of ironic that the Pokemon that is assumed to be unoriginal is inspiring ice cream in the games. Like, that just to me is funny that it's one is claimed to be inspired from, and then in the games it's the other way around. Like, it's kind of like they knew that this would be an originality debate, and I kind of love that. But like I said, there's not very many things that use ice cream as a creature, party member, anything like that. Like, ice cream is usually just used as like restorative food, so it's an original way and spin on the idea of ice cream. But it's the Pokemon, or one of the Pokemon, that is usually touted as being unoriginal. And that is a good way for me to segue into other media. So, for instance, let's think about the Spider-Mans, right? Spider-Man has had 4 different iterations. Yes, I'm counting Spider-Verse. I'm not exclusive to the live-action films. But we've had 4 different iterations. We've had 3 different Peter Parkers and 1 Miles Morales. And I don't think any one would say each of those Spider-Mans are like borrowing from another Spider-Man. You might be like, well, they're all Peter Parker and they're borrowing for the comics, but for comparing them to the comics, the original series, the Tobey Maguire series, was very loosely based on the comics. Like, they had ideas and concepts, and like the idea of the character is definitely from the comics. But the overall story, as well as the characters in them, are very much unlike the comic books. They very much deviate to a point where I would say it's pretty original. Like, Sam Raimi's trilogy is what most people would think of modern Spider-Man. Well, okay, maybe not modern Spider-Man. They associate him with the ideas of Spider-Man. And then we have Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man, which is more closely akin to the comics. Like, it is a modern version of what happens in the comics. Like, the arc Peter goes through is very similar to the arc Peter goes through in the comics. Like, it is pretty, not one for one, but it's pretty dang close. And his abilities and powers and whatnot, like his gadgets, all much more similar to the comics. But it is an original take for the live action. So the medium is its original view of Spider-Man. So that's also plays a part into it. And then we got Tom Holland as Spider-Man, which is also very unique. He is very much a modern Spider-Man, but it's not a modern telling like Andrew Garfield is. It's a modern kid who got the powers of Spider-Man. So it kind of creates its own unique identity, even though it is not an original character. They are all Peter Parker. And then we have Miles Morales in Into the Spider-Verse, and he is significantly different from the other 3. Like, I don't need to tell you that. It's literally a different character. Yes, I know he's also in the comics, but they take his Spider-Man in a very different and unique way. And all 3 of these, I would say, are original in a sense. So defining originality is a lot tougher than it would seem at first. Like, you can go different ways with originality. It could be original for the medium, kind of like Spider-Man with Andrew Garfield and the comics. Yeah, they're similar stories, but the medium which they're told, they are different, unique instances of that story. So would that be considered original, or would that be considered not original? What with Charizard, for instance, you have a billion different versions of dragons. So would he be original? Because we have lots of dragons, lots and lots of dragons everywhere. And then we have Vanillish, who's not considered original because it's directly taking from, like, very directly taking from from ice cream. But it is not an idea we see everywhere, and it is pretty unique in its use case from what my knowledge. Like, maybe there's some big franchise that uses ice cream as a main enemy. I don't know. But not that I'm aware of. Like, you can get anthropomorphic, like, cartoon ice cream, I'm guessing. That's probably your best bet to find something like Vanillish. But even then, that's slim in scope and narrow. Like, what constitutes as originality? Now, of course, with any definition of a word, it's going to based on you, your perspective, and what you think of it. Maybe one day I'll get into the sandwich debate, but what constitutes original? And if something is not original, does that make it bad? That's another part of this argument that I'm not sure is well developed, because Vanillish is stated as bad because it is not original. But I don't think being derivative or being very quote unquote unoriginal is necessarily a poor indication of quality. Now, it is very circumstantial. Very circumstantial. So, let's take Star Wars, for instance. In Star Wars, we have Episode 4, A New Hope, and Episode 7, The Force Awakens. They are very similar movies. Very similar. So, you've probably seen 1.5 billion videos on why they're like almost one-to-one comparisons, like there's almost no changes, blah blah blah, because episode 7 was made as like a love letter to the original trilogy. Lots of fan service, lots of similar imagery, story structures extraordinarily similar. Like, all of it is based on the original one, and to such a degree that I do think it affects the quality. But some people don't think that. Some people think, oh, it's a love letter, and they enjoy the movie. So their originality isn't even a factor in theirs. It is also a sequel movie, so, like, how original can you be with the 7th movie in the series? Like, this whole debate on originality affecting quality, I don't think is a good indicator, or is a good thing to use as an argument. Now, I'm not saying you can't use it. Going back to Force Awakens, I think that movie fails to carve out its own identity without uh, without the Force or the New Hope storyline. Like, it is very much the movie that is A New Hope. The new version of A New Hope is how I would describe it. Not told as well because it's leaning so hard into that identity of A New Hope. Meanwhile, with our earlier example of Vanillish, that Pokemon is very unique in its own right. Or we could even go back to our other example of the Spider-Mans. Recently, the Spider-Man No Way Home was a love letter to all of the Spider-Man iterations. All of them, even Miles Morales. He only gets like a tiny, tiny little mention with Electro being like, I just wish Spider-Man was black, but whatever. But that movie is very much a love letter to all 3 trilogy of movies. Or 3 trilogies of movies and Into the Spider-Verse. Like, you have all the Spider-Mans returning, and you have the story beats from each of those Spider-Man movies playing out in that movie. And it is derivative, it is borrowing heavily from those movies and those story beats, but it is making its own identity. So it kind of manages to circumnavigate the idea of originality and inspiration, unlike Force Awakens, in my opinion. But that's enough for me for today. I hope to hear you guys' thoughts, opinions, and give me your ideas or your criteria for like where originality is, like, hurts, where it's wonderful. Like, let's start a discussion. Let's talk about it. And with that being said, my name has been Sir Lord, and let's talk later. Bye.